Hi, in this video I'm going to give you just a really quick intro to HTML. We're just going to write our first HTML page, and my hope is that you'll see just how easy it is to do this. I remember I had a teacher that did the same exercise for me when I first learned HTML, and I was really blown away at just how simple it is, right? HTML isn't a programming language, it's just a markup language where we write some tags around some text to make text and images appear the way that we want them to appear in the browser. So the first thing that you'll need to do is to get a code editor installed on your machine. I'll be using one called Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, which you can find at code.visualstudio.com. So you want to go ahead and pause the video and get that set up on your machine. Another good one is called Atom, A-T-O-M, which you could Google and find, Atom Text Editor. And there's lots of fine ones out there. Most of them are the same. It doesn't really matter to me what code editor you use. But if you can get Visual Studio Code up and running, that's the best one around these days. So go ahead and pause and get that working on your computer, and then come back and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code, and I'm going to start a new document. So let's say new text file. Okay, great. So now I'm just going to start typing. Well, actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'll save it in my GitHub repo that we created earlier in class. So I've got a GitHub repo, if you remember, it's in a folder called GitHub on my computer. And I've got lots of repos. You're probably just going to have the one. And I'm going to go to the one that I made for this class called Adam-Martin-Jura352. It doesn't really have anything in it right now. A couple of the files that GitHub has popped in there that aren't even really viewable by us. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file in that folder. So I'll go to Save As, and I'll go and hunt down that folder. Here we go. And now I'm in that Adam Martin Jura352. I'm going to save this as index.html. An index is basically like the home page for a website. When a web browser goes to a folder or a web server or a web address, it's always going to look for index.html, and that is the file it's going to pull up first. So that's a good thing to name the home page of your website. Okay, so let's just go ahead and type in a few tags. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write HTML. And VS Code automatically closes it for me. So you can see what we're doing here is we're writing an HTML tag, right? So it's between those two caret tags. And then here we're closing that HTML tag using this slash. So we're basically telling the document, hey, here we're starting our HTML, and here we're closing our HTML. And that's a convention we're going to use throughout, where you generally, when you open a tag, you then have to close it. Not always, but the vast majority of the time. Okay, I'm going to add one little attribute inside this HTML tag. I'm going to say lang equals en. And you could probably guess what that means. It means language equals English. And here I'm just telling the browser, hey, this is going to be written in English. My content's going to be in English. Okay, so now we want to set up the two parts of our web page. The first one is called the head, and the second one is called the body. So the head is where we're going to put information about our HTML document for the browser, and the body is where we're actually going to put the content. Okay, so let's just add a few things to our head, and you can see as I'm working how I'm using these. I'm using margins and tabs to sort of help keep my code organized. Pay attention to how I do that and how they do it in the Code Academy tutorials, because I'll definitely want you to use that sort of indentation yourself to help keep your code organized. Okay, so I'm just going to write one thing in my head. I'm going to make a tag called title, and I'm going to close it. And I'll just make my title Adam Martin. So let's talk about what that title is. So the title, let's go to the Washington Post. The title is what appears up here in the tab. So the Washington Post's title is the Washington Post dash breaking news and latest headlines, U.S. news, world news, and video, the Washington Post. Okay, so if we looked at their code, that's what they would have in their title tag. If we Google the Washington Post. We're going to see that's also what appears here as sort of the title to their Google entry. So that's also being pulled from the title. So that's why we add that title tag in there, just so that we are identifying our web page both for Google and up there at the top of the tag. That's what that does. So we'll learn other stuff that we add in the head as we go along here this semester. But for now, that's all we're going to add. And just remember that head section is for things that we're telling the browser, not for content that people are going to see necessarily, but information for the browser about how our web page should display. Okay, so here's our body, and this is where we're going to add the actual content of our web page. And in this case, we're not going to add a lot. We're just going to add the words, hello world. And that's it. That's the content for our web page. It's a pretty typical thing to do when you're learning a new computer programming language, is just to figure out how to write hello world with the language. And that's all we're going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's go over to our folder. And we can see it's got this index.html that we saved. And if I open that with a browser, if I just double click it, it's automatically going to open it in Firefox for me. And we're going to see here's our web page with hello world. And if we right click on this and say view page source, we'll see that code that we just wrote there, right? So that's awesome. We wrote our first web page, and it's really very easy. And we'll be learning lots of HTML and also CSS as the semester goes on to be able to add to this to create whole web pages. For now, that's pretty much all I wanted to show you. I will pull up GitHub Desktop, and we can see, I have my GitHub repo pulled up online here, and you can see it doesn't really have anything in it. But because I've added this file to my GitHub folder on my computer, GitHub Desktop is telling me, oh, hey, you have a new file in your GitHub folder. You should add it to your repo. So I'm going to go ahead and do a push here. And so I'll name it. So it's suggesting I name it create index, which is fine. I'll click commit to master and then push origin. And now we've pushed that file up to GitHub, and if I come here and refresh, we'll see that now that index.html file is here in our GitHub repo, that's what we want to do when we are finished working locally in our computer, is push everything up to GitHub, because that way I'll be able to see it. So after you've gone, I'd like you guys to do this yourself now, and just go ahead and shoot me an email when you're done with a link to your GitHub repo so I can see your index.html in there. Thanks so much.